14 years after the release of his first mixtape, Abel Tesfaye, aka The Weeknd, is officially retiring that moniker upon completing his final studio album, Hurry Up Tomorrow. And what started with a trilogy will end with a trilogy composed of After Hours, Dawn FM, and now Hurry Up Tomorrow. Today we'll be taking a deep dive into this trilogy, finding Easter eggs, and following the story of The Weeknd throughout. Join me as we dissect the After Hours trilogy from start to finish. Before we hop in, we have to analyze our main protagonist, The Weeknd. Now, everything we talk about here is strictly music related, so if you hear me say a couple of nasty things about this guy's character, I am not referring to Abel, I am referring to The Weeknd. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start at House of Balloons. Looking back at The Weeknd's first mixtape, he is perhaps at his most evil. We get a persona addicted to drugs, sex, and partying, but the sound of the music is never happy. These tracks either come off as these tripped out parties or these dark ballads where The Weeknd is coping with heartbreak in the worst possible ways. He simultaneously plays as a confident womanizer and a heartbroken man who's a shell of his former self. This theme continues throughout his career, and with the inevitable fame The Weeknd would achieve, his toxic characteristics amplify. The destructive misogynist arc continues throughout the original trilogy, but as The Weeknd's character progresses, we learn a lot more about our main character. Between trilogy and After Hours is a lot of braggadocio paired with a few dark tracks that remind us of what made him famous. Much of the darker subject matter is hidden under catchy hooks and upbeat pop production. Think Can't Feel My Face and The Hills. By 2015, The Weeknd was a global superstar, and a year afterward, he'd make an album about it. Starboy was a victory lap for The Weeknd and fully leaned into MJ-inspired pop as opposed to the dark R&B sound he began his career with. In my opinion, this is where The Weeknd's character began his downfall. There were really no sacrifices to his artistry on this record, but it was the peak of his career, and since he was already at the top, he could only go down from here. Starboy contained hints The Weeknd was still dealing with his destructive lifestyle, i.e. Ordinary Life and Party Monster, but it was also the most vulnerable we had seen him on songs like True Colors and I Feel It Coming. My Dear Melancholy came out 2 years later, and while it's probably the least talked about Weeknd project apart from Kissland, it's important in the grand scheme of things. Just a 6-song EP, it was the darkest project The Weeknd dropped since Trilogy. In my opinion, a prelude of what was to come on After Hours. 2 years after that, Heartless dropped. While The Weeknd we observed on House of Balloons was a seemingly irredeemable misogynist, this new character, while having some of the same toxic traits, was someone you could choose to empathize with. He wanted love, but anytime love would come close, he'd cut it off and choose his catastrophic lifestyle. We'd learn more about why he'd act this way on Dawn FM, but this is perhaps the biggest theme on After Hours. A man who wants love but can never have it because he's a barrier to himself. He simultaneously accepts that he's an evil man resistant to change, but also can't deal with the pain of being that terrible person. We see that he has empathy, but it still can't keep him from making bad choices. The only way to rid himself of this torture is to kill The Weeknd off, something his newest album plays heavily into. With all that out of the way, we can begin our descent into the After Hours trilogy, going song by song and exploring the final journey of The Weeknd. After Hours seemingly starts off with a breakup. I believe this is both a physical breakup with a woman and a personal breakup with Abel trying to kill off the Weeknd persona. This is clear in the first line of Alone Again, "Take off my disguise, I'm living someone else's life." In his subconscious, Abel never wanted to become this person, but here he is, too far gone. Alone Again sees him in Vegas at a strip club and ties directly into the next song, Too Late. We learn more about his lover on this track, him claiming that when the darkness comes, she's his light. It seems he dragged her into this dark lifestyle he's been living, and they're in a bit of a stalemate, each struggling to move on from the other. The Weeknd knows this woman loves him, but it seems she's either reaching a breaking point, or he's actively trying to push her away as he knows he'll just end up hurting her more. Hardest to Love is a brighter spot on the record, but still a breakup song. While his lover is trying to let him down softly, he knows what's coming. This is the prelude to the acceptance song where they mutually agree it's over. The Weeknd doesn't regret this relationship, but there's definitely a disappointment in his voice that he let another good one go. Scared to Live is the most empathetic we see the Weeknd on the rest of the album. The whole track is essentially apologizing to this woman for how he treated her, and that she should go see other people. From the lyric, "Refuse to be the one who taints your heart," we learn the Weeknd himself is who actually cut this relationship off out of fear he'd hurt her more. There's an underlying regret towards the end of the song, and the Weeknd heavily questions if he made the right choice. Regardless, this is where the relationship officially ends, and the first turning point of the album. Snow Child is a bit of an interlude, the Weeknd detailing that he'd like to leave California, not for any specific reason, but we'll find out later. While Snow Child seems like a simple braggadocious song, there are some important lyrics that add to the Weeknd's character. The second line, in fact, addressing self-harm, and another line later on the song saying at one point he had nothing to believe in. This song kind of shows how becoming the Weeknd simultaneously saved him and cursed him. Escape from LA sees the Weeknd in talks with a seemingly new woman, and this is when he's once again at his most unforgivable. When it comes to all these hoes I'll never chase, but this world is such an evil place, man, these hoes will always find a way, essentially blaming his infidelity on the women instead of himself. This has a hold on him and seems to be the reason he wants to get out of LA and start fresh. However, that doesn't happen. The second half of the song details a nefarious sexual encounter in which both parties are cheating on their significant others. This leads into Heartless and Faith, which, in my opinion, are the lowest points for our character on the entire record. On Heartless, the Weeknd fully embraces his destructive lifestyle and accepts that he can't change. For nearly the entire song, he sings about the women he's manipulating and the drugs he's doing. Something very important to mention, however, is the bridge towards the end of the track. I lost my heart and my mind. I try to always do right. I thought I lost you this time. You just came back in my life. You never gave up on me. I'll never know what you see. I don't do well when alone. You hear it clear in my tone. He thought he escaped from LA unscathed, but a woman he once had a relationship with returned to check in on him. He's frustrated by this as he's never been shown so much forgiveness in his life. This encounter makes it harder for him to cope with what he's doing. Faith moves away from the sexual addictions and turns towards the Weeknd's relationships with drugs. It contains some of the darkest lyrics on the album. When I'm coming down is the most I feel alone. I've been sober for a year, now it's time for me to go back to my old ways. I choose Vegas if they offer Heaven's Gate. The craziest lyric on this song, though, is, I tried to love, but you know I'd never stay, but if I OD, I want you to OD right beside me. It's proof he does have love for this person, but he doesn't have the power to choose her over the drugs. The song abruptly ends with police sirens behind a hazed out beat, showing the Weeknd went unconscious from the drug use, and either a cop car or an ambulance is taking him somewhere. So Blinding Lights, one of the biggest songs ever, is not just a hit that will outlive everyone watching this, it's an integral song to the After Hours trilogy. This song seems to be a revelation to the Weeknd, finally a breakthrough after a long saga of darkness. Whether it's some sort of dream or vision, it's one of the brightest spots on the album. It shows him truly embracing the love of a person, and the bright lights of the city are something to be comforted by. You can also interpret it as a temporary vision, one that has the drugs making this ambulance or police car seem like a safe haven when it's really not. Knowing what's coming, this theory makes sense, but there are a few more bright spots on After Hours before the Weeknd slips again. I think In Your Eyes is the Weeknd taking this vision from Blinding Lights and applying it to his former relationship, opening up about the lack of love for himself and how it damaged his relationships with other people. In Your Eyes and Save Your Tears are fantastic songs, but I don't think they play a huge narrative in the album's concept, so we'll move on to the final 3 tracks. Repeat After Me interlude has the Weeknd in denial, regretful he let this woman slip away again, and extremely spiteful and jealous. After some moments of clarity on Blinding Lights and In Your Eyes, he has once again fallen victim to the darkest parts of himself. The After Hours title track is the Weeknd's magnum opus and one of the most important songs on the trilogy. It's where the Weeknd dies in the physical sense, but this wouldn't be the end of his journey. This is where he has to face reality and the consequences of what he's done. He's coping with all his regret and it's slowly killing him. Until I Bleed Out is a separate song, but probably could have been used as an outro to this track. This is where the Weeknd is falling into the purgatory state we'll see on Dawn FM, and officially the beginning of the end of the Weeknd character as a whole. And so with the Weeknd in some sort of dark afterlife, we enter into the world of Dawn FM. Jim Carrey narrates this album as if it were a radio station, but he also seems to be the only other sign of life in this underworld. He mentions that it's time to walk into the light. I believe this symbolizes redemption and forgiveness for The Weeknd, something he'll search for on his journey through Dawn FM. The album cover is also important to note here. While I was very thrown off by it when this record came out, it makes a lot of sense now. It personifies a few different things. One, how The Weeknd feels internally, like an old, frail man after all he's been through, and two, a reflection of his future and what he'll look like if he remains down this path. I saw an annotation on Genius that provides another interesting theory. Boris Covert says, the music video for Gasoline also explains his album cover photo. The album is Abel's version of The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is a novel written by Oscar Wilde in which the main character has a portrait of himself that gets older with every sin the main character does. That way, the main character remains young and the picture gets more and more old. The only way to make this picture young again is to admit and accept your past mistakes and sins, but the main character is not willing to do that, so he tries to kill and destroy his old portrait, young Abel hidden his old self, which in the end kills the main character and revives the old portrait into the original young picture. Gasoline is the end of another trip, but in this instance, The Weeknd is immune to overdosing. We see him exploring this other reality with a past lover, but it seems he's actually alone and they are just an illusion. How Do I Make You Love Me is an interesting song because it seems like a simple love tune, but that's not really what it is. The first verse sees The Weeknd traveling through his past, but only wanting to remain in the present. I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but it seems like The Weeknd kind of has a mentor figure that's following him throughout Dawn FM, trying to understand forgiveness for himself. This could be Jim Carrey, but regardless, that's kind of how I feel about this album. I know this is very cliche, but How Do I Make You Love Me sounds more like a person battling with self-acceptance than acceptance from another lover. Take My Breath Away and Make It Last Forever is kind of self-explanatory, but I think the song is much darker than it sounds. Going back to the I Want You to OD Right Beside Me lyric, I feel this song resembles the same sentiment. Sacrifice is basically The Weeknd saying he loves his free time too much to commit to a relationship. So Dawn FM so far, while the music is incredible, the narrative isn't as linear as something like After Hours. But when we get to A Tale by Quincy, everything about The Weeknd's persona as a whole makes sense. Quincy Jones details his upbringing and how his mother was put in a mental institution due to dementia. Thus he was left alone with just his father and an evil stepmother, which had long-lasting effects on his development. This damaged his relationships with both family and romantic ones. The Weeknd never mentions being raised without a mother figure, but he does talk about his dad leaving in a future song on this trilogy. Whenever I got too close to a woman, I would cut her off. Part of that was vindictive and partially based on fear, but it was also totally subconscious. Sound familiar? What Quincy went through has clearly leaked into The Weeknd's life based on narratives of relationships. At the end of Out of Time, Jim appears again talking about a light that will completely engulf The Weeknd, freeing him from all sins and trauma. I don't think the next few songs play into the narrative much, with Here We Go Again being another celebratory anthem, and Best Friends being an interesting look into a friends with benefits situation. Is There Someone Else doesn't play much into it either, apart from a few lines where The Weeknd addresses his past and how he doesn't want to stay that way. This shows us some growth through this purgatory state. Starry Eyes is a big breakthrough for our main character, essentially asking this woman to let him love her, even if it means she'll be the one to break his heart later. As a matter of fact, The Weeknd may actually want this, as he says, "Baby break me, kick me to the curb." Maybe this is a way of The Weeknd's forgiveness process where he needs someone to inflict on him the same pain he inflicted upon others. Free Angel is Terrifying is an interlude with an ad for both Afterlife, long speculated to be The Weeknd's final album in this trilogy, and a brief message from The Weeknd himself wondering if any angel could even forgive him. I don't interpret the next two songs in any specific way, except I Heard You're Married is maybe a metaphor for a love being gone. Less Than Zero is the last full-length song on the record, and one that I think shows a lot of growth in our main character. It's about a former lover perceiving him as a nobody because of how he treated her. Compared to an early Weeknd track, he shows a lot more forgiveness and acceptance here, coping with the fact he took these actions and assumes responsibility. I try to hide it, but I know you know me. I try to fight it, but I'd rather be free. He is done running from his past, and he can finally begin his transformation here. Phantom Regret, the spoken word outro by Jim Carrey, contains a lot to speculate on, but the main takeaway here is that The Weeknd seems to have escaped this purgatory state. Now that all future plans have been postponed, and it's time to look back at the things you thought you owned. Clearly, The Weeknd wants to remain on his path towards forgiveness instead of giving up and fading into the light here. You gotta be heaven to see heaven, may peace be with you, is how the album ends. An important message, and one that will leak into the final album we're covering today, where Abel realizes he cannot be heaven without first killing off the Weeknd persona. So after finishing up with Dawn FM, I realized that maybe going song by song isn't the best idea for closing out the rest of this story. It worked well for After Hours, but things aren't so linear after that. Without further ado though, let's hop into Hurry Up Tomorrow, the final album in the trilogy. Tomorrow definitely seems like a metaphor for heaven, especially considering the way Dawn FM ends. I know I said at the beginning I'd be talking about Abel and the Weeknd separately, but it's very hard to do that within this record, as the entire theme is Abel battling with himself over whether he needs to kill the Weeknd off or not. I think this album cover does a great job showing that too. The pain Abel feels from both being the Weeknd and having to rid himself of that alias to become healthy. There's another interesting theme here that occurred a few years ago, the Weeknd losing his voice during a show in LA. I think it's pretty clear this was the breaking point for Abel in regards to the Weeknd moniker. It's very cool he brought it back as an interlude on this record and pretty much confirms that suspicion. Baptized in Fear is no doubt the darkest song on the album, the Weeknd paralyzed in a bathtub nearly drowning to death, presumably after overdosing. Listening to this album makes me wonder how much of this lifestyle Abel actually lives, and I hope it's not a lot because this song is grim. From Opening Night to Giving Up on Me, we actually do have a bit of narrative action. Opening Night details the Weeknd's interactions with a new love interest and how his fame handicaps his new relationships. It ends with him once again getting intoxicated before the show. Reflections Laughing has his lover reaching out to him in the middle of the track, confirming the Weeknd has gone back to his old ways a la House of Balloons. I love how Travis Scott comes into this song and essentially plays as the drugged out version of him. Enjoy the Show feels like the first funeral of the Weeknd. It feels like Abel is singing directly about his character. No one thought I'd make it past 24, and when the curtains call I hope you mourn, and if you don't I hope you enjoy the fucking show. Speaks for itself. We also have Future calling back to Can't Feel My Face and delivering an unexpectedly beautiful verse. Take another hit or my music, they won't feel it. I just want to die when I'm at my fucking peak. Is another reference to how the Weeknd persona is killing Abel, the man behind the project. He believes he can only make great music when he's intoxicated or else people won't enjoy it. After a very dark beginning on Giving Up on Me, the song wraps up with Abel praying to God for forgiveness. The next few songs have Abel accepting his situation, even mentioning he may try to connect with his father he never knew. I Can't Wait to Get There has him detailing his future plans. Take Me Back to LA is self-explanatory, but an interesting callback to Escape from LA. The track is actually from the After Hours era, but didn't make the cut to the final album or as a bonus track. From Big Sleep Forward feels like the final transition into Tomorrow for the Weeknd. Give Me Mercy feels like a church ballad, and Drive is his escape from fame. If Enjoy the Show was a prelude to the Weeknd's funeral, The Abyss is the real thing. Genius says the song is about the end of a relationship, but I really think this is Abel cutting things off with the Weeknd. Red Terror is a tribute to Abel's mother with an important backstory. This was so cool to hear because we never hear the Weeknd writing about his personal life unless it relates to his celebrity persona. On Genius, Beauregard said, "The Red Terror was a genocide in Ethiopia where countless lives were lost under a ruthless dictatorship. His 8-month pregnant mother's journey from that horror to raising a global superstar is a testament to strength and resilience." This is what the entire song of Red Terror is about, Abel detailing his mother and the journey she went through to have him. Without a Warning is a message directly to the fans, the Weeknd asking for love before he officially departs. And what can I even say about the title track Hurry Up Tomorrow? What an incredible way for the Weeknd to end his run. I almost never cry during music, but listening to this song with headphones on legit almost made me tear up. We know from House of Balloons and onward that the Weeknd damaged a lot of people, but the way he addresses the pain and begs for forgiveness on this song is absolutely incredible. And I've been trying to fill that void that my father left so no one else abandons me, I'm sorry. That line alone is so powerful, knowing all we know about the Weeknd and all he's been through, but it's the next few lines that really got me because he calls back to Baptized in Fear. But now I'm drowning in the same tub where I learned how to swim, with my mother trying to save every ounce of my innocence. I failed her like I failed myself, I'm sorry. I'm done with the lies, I'm done with the loss, I hope this confession is enough. He is so exhausted and heartbroken after all this time being the Weeknd, and Hurry Up Tomorrow as a song is his final bout for forgiveness. Balloons. The song wraps up by transitioning seamlessly into High for This, the first song on House of Balloons, giving The Weeknd's discography a complete, perfect loop. And so we've reached the end of covering the After Hours trilogy. Let me know what you guys think of the trilogy, tell me about your interpretations, and be sure to comment your favorite song on Hurry Up Tomorrow down below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let's all look forward to what Abel decides to drop under his real name in the future.